The evening began like any other in the elegant restaurant. Soft lights reflected off polished tables, and quiet music floated through the air. The place was known for its calm atmosphere, where wealthy guests came to relax after long days. People spoke in low voices, careful not to disturb the peaceful mood. Expensive plates were carried carefully from the kitchen, and glasses clinked gently as they were placed on the tables. Among the staff moving back and forth was a young waitress. She wore a simple uniform, clean and neatly pressed. Her steps were quick but careful, her posture respectful. She had learned long ago how to stay almost invisible, blending into the background while making sure everyone had what they needed. Most guests barely noticed her face. To them, she was just another worker doing her job. Her day had started early as it usually did. Before sunrise, she had already been awake, preparing for another long shift. Life had taught her to be strong and patient. She carried responsibilities that most people around her never imagined. Bills, worries, and quiet hopes followed her everywhere, even into the restaurant's calm space. As she moved between tables, she observed people without trying to. Couples laughed softly, business partners discussed deals, and families enjoyed rare moments together. At one table near the center sat a man whose presence felt different. His clothing was simple but clearly expensive. His posture showed confidence, and others around him seemed to listen carefully when he spoke. It was clear he was someone used to being respected. The waitress noticed him only briefly before returning to her tasks. She had learned not to stare or judge. For her, every guest was the same, someone to be served with care and politeness. Still, something about the evening felt slightly unusual, though she could not explain why. Near the far side of the room stood a grand piano. It was large, glossy, and beautiful, but it was rarely used. Most nights, it sat quietly, more like a decoration than an instrument. Guests admired it as they walked past, but no one ever played it. It had been there for years, collecting more silence than sound. As the waitress passed by the piano, she slowed for just a moment. Her eyes rested on the smooth black surface. There was a familiar feeling in her chest, one she had learned to push aside. She took a small breath and continued walking. There was work to be done, and memories were not part of the job. She returned to the kitchen, picked up another tray, and checked the order carefully. Everything had to be perfect. In a place like this, mistakes were not welcomed. She balanced the tray with practiced ease and walked back into the dining area, her expression calm and professional. A guest asked for more water. Another wanted a different fork. She responded politely, her voice soft and respectful. No one could tell how tired she was or how much effort it took to stay cheerful. She had learned to smile even when her feet ached and her mind felt heavy. As the evening went on, the restaurant grew fuller. The quiet hum of conversation filled the space. Laughter rose and fell, glasses were refilled, and plates were cleared away. The waitress moved smoothly through it all, like she had done countless times before. Still, her thoughts wandered back to the piano. She tried to ignore it, reminding herself that this was not the place or time for dreams. That part of her life felt far away, almost like it belonged to someone else. Years had passed since she had last touched piano keys. Life had taken her in a different direction, one shaped by necessity rather than choice. She remembered a time when music had been her escape. When days were hard, sitting at a piano had made the world feel quieter and kinder. But responsibilities had grown, and opportunities had disappeared. Slowly, music had been pushed aside, replaced by survival. The waitress shook her head slightly, as if to clear the thoughts. She focused again on the tables, on the guests, on the work in front of her. This was her reality now, and she had accepted it. At the center table, the confident man finished his meal and leaned back in his chair. He seemed relaxed, enjoying the atmosphere. Others around him laughed at something he said. His presence commanded attention without effort. The waitress approached the table to clear the plates, her movements careful and respectful. As she reached for a plate, she caught a glimpse of the man's expression. It was calm, almost amused, as if the world rarely surprised him. She lowered her gaze, focused on her task, and moved on. Nearby, a small issue arose with the restaurant's background music. The sound cut out briefly, leaving an unexpected silence. A few guests looked around, confused. Someone joked about the quiet. The staff hurried to fix the problem, but for a moment, the room was still. In that silence, the piano stood out more than ever. The waitress felt her heart beat a little faster. The familiar feeling returned, stronger this time. She stood near the piano, holding a tray, her mind racing. It was just a piano, she told herself. Just an object. But to her, it was more than that. She took a step back, unsure of what she was feeling. No one was looking at her. No one expected anything. She reminded herself again of her place, of her role, of the rules she followed every day. The music system began working again, filling the room with soft sound. The moment passed, but something inside her had shifted. A small spark had been lit, one she had not felt in a long time. She returned to her duties, but her thoughts were no longer as quiet. The piano remained in her mind, waiting silently, just like it had all these years. The evening continued, unaware that it was slowly moving towards something unforgettable. No one in the room, not even the confident millionaire, could have imagined that an ordinary night was about to become a moment people would remember forever. And the waitress, moving quietly between tables, had no idea that her life stood at the edge of change, waiting for a single brave step. The waitress finished her shift later than usual that night. By the time the last guests left and the lights were dimmed, her feet felt heavy and her shoulders ached. She helped clean the tables, wiped surfaces, and stacked chairs with the rest of the staff. Everyone moved quietly, tired but used to the routine. When her work was done, she changed out of her uniform and stepped outside into the cool night air. The street was calmer than the restaurant had been. Cars passed slowly, their lights reflecting on the wet pavement. She pulled her jacket closer and began the walk home. The events of the evening replayed in her mind, not because anything big had happened, but because something inside her would not settle. The piano kept returning to her thoughts. At home, her place was small but clean. It was the kind of space that showed careful living. Nothing was wasted. She set her bag down, removed her shoes, and sat quietly for a moment. The silence felt louder here than it had at work. No voices, no music, no movement, just her thoughts. She went to the window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere far away, someone laughed. Somewhere else, music played softly. She closed her eyes, and without meaning to, her fingers moved slightly in the air, pressing keys that were not there. It had been years since she allowed herself to remember those days. Back then, music had felt like the center of her world. She had practiced whenever she could, early mornings and late nights. The piano had been old and slightly out of tune, but to her it was perfect. Every note felt like a conversation, every song like a story. Life, however, had different plans. Responsibilities came quickly and without warning. There were people who depended on her. There were choices she had to make, and dreams were the first things to be set aside. Music slowly became something she kept locked away, not because she stopped loving it, but because loving it hurt too much. She opened a small drawer and took out a folded piece of paper. It was worn at the edges, handled many times. Inside were old notes, simple melodies written by hand. She had kept them all these years, even when she told herself she was done with that part of life. She sat at the small table and unfolded the paper carefully. Her eyes moved across the lines, and memories rushed back. The feeling of keys beneath her fingers, the sound filling a room, the way time seemed to disappear when she played. She let out a slow breath and folded the paper again. Tomorrow was another workday. Bills still needed to be paid. Life would continue the same way it always did. Still, something had changed. The thought scared her a little. The next evening, she returned to work. The restaurant looked just as elegant as before. The piano stood in its usual place, quiet and untouched. She tried not to look at it, but it was harder now. Every time she passed, her chest felt tight. A coworker joked about how tired everyone was. Another complained about a demanding guest. The waitress smiled and nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She moved through her tasks like always, yet part of her felt distant. As the night went on, the restaurant filled with familiar faces and new ones. Among them was the confident man from the night before. He sat at the same table, calm and relaxed, surrounded by guests who listened when he spoke. He seemed comfortable in every situation, like someone who never doubted his place in the world. The waitress noticed him only because she had to serve his table. She brought drinks, took orders, and cleared plates. Their eyes met briefly once, but there was no recognition, no special attention. To him, she was still just a waitress. At one point, a guest mentioned the piano, asking why no one ever played it. A staff member laughed politely and said it was mostly for decoration. The conversation moved on, but the words stayed with the waitress. Later, during a quiet moment, she stood near the piano again. No one was watching. The background music played softly, but it felt distant. She reached out without thinking and lightly touched the edge of the piano. The surface was cool and smooth. She pulled her hand back quickly, almost as if she had done something wrong. Her heart beat faster. It was a small action, but it felt dangerous, like stepping too close to a past she had worked hard to bury. In her mind, she heard voices from long ago, encouraging words, applause, hope. She shook her head gently, reminding herself that those days were over. The rest of the shift passed slowly. She focused on her work, on the plates and glasses and polite smiles. But the idea that she might still have something inside her refused to leave. When the night ended and she walked home again, the city felt different. Not brighter, not darker, just uncertain. She realized she was standing between two versions of herself, the one who survived and the one who once dreamed. At home, she did not take out the old notes this time. Instead, she sat quietly and thought about the question she had avoided for years. What if the music was not gone? The thought was both comforting and frightening. She did not know the answer yet. She only knew that something had been awakened, and it would not be easy to ignore. Outside, the city continued its endless movement, unaware of the quiet battle happening inside a small room. And somewhere in an elegant restaurant, a piano waited in silence, closer than it had ever been before. The third evening arrived quietly, without warning or drama. The waitress prepared for work the same way she always did, tying her hair back, checking her uniform, and taking a deep breath before stepping out. On the surface, nothing had changed. Inside, however, her thoughts were louder than ever. At the restaurant, the atmosphere was already busy. A private event had been booked, and staff moved quickly to prepare. Extra tables were arranged, glasses polished, and the piano was uncovered and cleaned more carefully than usual. It surprised her to see it treated with such attention. A coworker mentioned that a guest had requested live music if possible. No one knew who would play. The restaurant did not employ a pianist. The comment was followed by laughter and quickly forgotten. But the words stayed with her. She passed by the piano again, noticing how it looked under the lights. For the first time, she wondered what it would feel like to sit there now, after all these years. The thought made her stomach tighten. The guests began to arrive. Well-dressed men and women filled the room, their voices blending into a low, steady hum. Among them was the same confident man, the one whose presence always seemed to change the mood around him. Tonight, he appeared even more relaxed, speaking easily, smiling often. People leaned in when he talked. The waitress focused on her work. Drinks were served, orders taken, plates delivered. She moved quickly, but her hands felt slightly unsteady. She noticed small things she normally would not, like the way her heart sped up whenever she was near the piano. At one point, the background music stopped again. This time, it did not return. A staff member checked the system, whispering to another with concern. Guests looked around, waiting. The silence felt heavier than before. Someone made a comment about the piano. Another guest nodded toward it, clearly interested. The room filled with quiet curiosity. The manager stepped forward, offering apologies and promising to fix the issue. He joked lightly to keep the mood relaxed, but it was clear he had no solution. The waitress stood near the edge of the room, holding a tray she no longer needed. Her mind raced. The moment felt unreal, like the world was pausing, waiting. She thought of the old notes in her drawer. She thought of the years she had spent avoiding this feeling. She thought of how safe it had been to remain unnoticed. Her feet moved before her mind could stop them. She took a small step forward, then another. Each step felt heavier than the last. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure others could hear it. She spoke quietly, her voice almost lost in the room. She offered, politely and unsure, that she could try to play something simple. The room went very still. The manager looked at her in surprise. Some guests raised their eyebrows. A few exchanged doubtful glances. The confident man leaned back slightly, studying her with mild curiosity. There was a pause that felt endless. The manager hesitated, then nodded. There was nothing to lose, he said. Just something soft, he added, smiling politely. Her hands trembled as she approached the piano. She could feel eyes on her back, feel the weight of attention she had avoided for so long. She sat down slowly, adjusting the bench, taking a breath. For a moment, she did nothing. The silence stretched. She placed her fingers on the keys. The first note was soft, almost unsure. Then another. Slowly, a simple melody began to form. Her hands remembered more than she expected. The movements felt familiar, like returning to a place she had once lived. The room grew quiet. Conversations stopped. Even the sound of cutlery faded. As she continued, the music grew stronger. Her fingers moved with confidence now, guided by memory and feeling. She was no longer thinking about the guests or the manager or her job. She was inside the music. The confident man straightened in his chair. His expression changed from casual interest to focus. He leaned forward slightly, listening. The melody carried emotion, not just skill. It spoke of longing, of loss, of hope held quietly for years. It was not perfect, but it was honest. Some guests closed their eyes. Others watched her hands in disbelief. No one spoke. She played as if time had slowed. Each note felt like a release, like something heavy lifting from her chest. She forgot where she was, forgot who was watching. When the final note faded, the silence returned. For a moment, no one moved. Then someone began to clap. Slowly, others joined in. The applause grew louder, filling the room. Faces showed surprise, admiration, even emotion. The waitress stood, unsure of what to do. Her face felt warm. She bowed her head slightly, overwhelmed. The confident man rose from his seat. The room quieted again. He looked at her with a seriousness she had not seen before. He spoke, praising the music not as entertainment, but as something rare. His words were calm, respectful. The room listened. She nodded, not trusting her voice. As she returned to her duties, nothing felt the same. Guests smiled at her now. Some thanked her. Others simply looked at her differently. Inside, she felt both exposed and alive. The night continued, but the moment lingered, heavy with possibility. And the piano, no longer silent, seemed to wait for what would come next. The applause slowly faded, but the feeling it left behind stayed heavy in the air. The waitress returned to her work, though her hands still felt warm from the piano keys. Every step felt different now, as if the floor itself had shifted beneath her feet. She focused on clearing tables and refilling glasses, trying to return to the rhythm she knew so well. Guests continued to speak about the music in quiet tones. Some smiled as she passed. Others nodded with a kind of respect she had never received before. It made her uncomfortable and proud at the same time. She kept her head down, unsure how to carry this new attention. The confident man sat back at his table, thoughtful. He no longer spoke as much as before. When he did, his voice was lower, more measured. His eyes followed the waitress from time to time, not with judgment, but with curiosity. The night moved on, but the room had changed. Conversations felt softer. People listened more. The piano, once ignored, now felt like the heart of the space. During a short break, the waitress stepped into the quiet hallway near the kitchen. Her heart was still racing. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. A mix of emotions rushed through her. Relief, fear, excitement, and doubt. She wondered if she had made a mistake. She wondered if she had crossed a line she could not return from. A coworker approached, smiling widely. The coworker praised her courage and talent, speaking with genuine excitement. The waitress thanked her quietly, still unsure how to accept such words. Compliments were unfamiliar territory. When she returned to the dining area, the manager stopped her briefly. His tone was kind but serious. He said the guests had enjoyed the music and asked if she would consider playing again later, just for a few minutes. Her stomach tightened. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to say no, to retreat back into safety. Another part, stronger now, wanted to continue. She agreed but asked for time. As the evening progressed, the confident man requested a conversation with the manager. They spoke quietly near the entrance. The waitress noticed but did not listen. She assumed it had nothing to do with her. Later, when the time came, the manager approached her again. The guests were ready, he said, only if she felt comfortable. She walked to the piano with slower steps this time. The room watched in silence. She sat, took a deep breath and began to play again. This time, the music flowed more freely. She felt less afraid. Her fingers moved with confidence shaped by trust in herself. The melody was different, warmer, fuller, carried hope instead of hesitation. Guests leaned in, drawn by the sound. The confident man listened closely, his expression unreadable. When she finished, the response was immediate. Applause filled the room again, louder than before. Some guests stood. The waitress felt tears rise, but she held them back. The confident man stood once more. This time he walked toward her. The room quieted. He spoke calmly, thanking her for the experience. He said the music reminded him of something he had lost long ago. His voice carried honesty, not pride. He asked where she had learned to play. She answered simply, explaining that it had been part of her life once, but not anymore. She spoke without drama, without asking for sympathy. He nodded slowly. He said talent like that should not disappear. The words were not loud, but they carried weight. After he returned to his table, the rest of the night passed in a blur. The waitress finished her shift with care, but her mind was elsewhere. When the last guest left, she helped clean, moving quietly as always. Before leaving, the manager stopped her one final time. He told her the confident man had left his contact information. He said she did not have to respond. There was no pressure. She held the small card in her hand as she walked home. The night air felt cooler than usual. Every step echoed with questions. At home, she placed the card on the table and sat across from it. She did not touch it for a long time. Memories and fears battled inside her. She thought of the life she knew, the one that felt safe. She thought of the music that had awakened something she could no longer ignore. She picked up the card and read it once. Then she set it down again. Sleep did not come easily that night. Her dreams were filled with sound, with light, with open doors she was afraid to walk through. By morning, she knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed moved slowly, as if time itself was being careful. The waitress returned to her routine, waking early, preparing for work, and walking the same streets she always had. On the outside, nothing looked different. Inside, everything felt unsettled. She kept the small card tucked safely in her bag. She did not look at it often, but she knew it was there. Its presence felt heavy, like a question waiting for an answer she was not ready to give. At the restaurant, people treated her differently now. Some guests asked if she would play again. Others spoke kindly, asking about music and smiling as if they already knew her. She answered politely, keeping her responses short. Tension still made her uneasy. The piano was no longer ignored. Staff cleaned it more carefully. Guests sat closer to it. The room seemed to expect something from it now. One evening, after a long shift, the manager asked if she would like to play again. There was no pressure in his voice, only respect. She agreed, choosing a quiet moment when the room was calm. When she played, the music felt steadier. She was no longer fighting fear with every note. Still, she kept the performance simple, careful not to draw too much focus. The guests listened, appreciative but calm. Afterward, the confident man did not approach her. Instead, the manager passed along a message. He would like to speak with her only if she was comfortable. She thought about it for a long moment. Then she nodded. They spoke near the entrance, away from the noise. His voice was gentle, without command. He thanked her again for the music and said he had not meant to put her on the spot. He explained that he supported young artists and believed in helping talent grow. She listened quietly. She did not interrupt. She did not assume anything. He asked about her goals. The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in years. She answered honestly. She said she did not know anymore. Life had taught her to focus on what was necessary, not what was possible. He nodded, understanding more than he said. He told her there were opportunities if she wanted them. Lessons, practice space, introductions to people who could guide her. Nothing promised, nothing forced. He handed her the card again, this time directly. He said she could decide in her own time. That night she walked home slowly. The city felt quieter, as if listening. She held the card in her hand, tracing its edges. Fear whispered that change was dangerous. Hope whispered that staying the same might be worse. At home, she sat at the table and finally allowed herself to imagine. Not a perfect future, not a dream filled with applause, but a simple one. Piano, time to play, space to grow. The thought brought tears to her eyes. The next morning, she called the number. Her voice shook as she spoke. She said she wanted to learn again, but she needed to move slowly. She could not risk everything at once. The response was patient. There was no rush. A meeting was arranged, simple and informal. Days later, she stepped into a quiet studio filled with light. A piano waited in the center of the room. She felt the same familiar tightening in her chest. She sat and played a few notes. They sounded different here, clearer, honest. The person guiding her listened without judgment. They spoke about practice, about rebuilding strength and confidence, about patience. She returned to work afterward, feeling both exhausted and alive. Her days became fuller. Mornings held practice. Evenings held work. Nights held reflection. It was not easy. Her fingers ached. Doubt returned often. There were moments when she wondered if she had waited too long. But there were also moments when the music felt right again. When her hands moved without fear. When the sound reminded her who she was. At the restaurant, guests continued to listen when she played. The confident man watched from a distance, never interfering. One evening, after a particularly moving performance, the room fell silent before applause. The silence felt respectful, not shocked. The waitress stood and smiled, no longer hiding her face. She realized then that she was no longer choosing between survival and dreams. She was learning how to hold both. The journey ahead was uncertain, but it was hers. And for the first time in many years, that felt enough. Time passed, not quickly, not slowly, but steadily. The waitress learned to live inside this new rhythm of her life. Her days were no longer only about work and rest. They now included practice, reflection, and quiet moments of growth. She still worked at the restaurant, still wore the same uniform, still walked the same streets. Yet something within her had shifted in a way that could not be undone. She practiced whenever she could. Some days the music flowed easily, filling the room with warmth. Other days her fingers felt stiff and unsure. On those days, frustration returned, whispering doubts she thought she had left behind. But she no longer let those voices win. She reminded herself that growth was never a straight path. At the restaurant, the piano became part of the evening routine. Guests now expected music, not as entertainment, but as an experience. The waitress played only when she felt ready, and no one pressured her. The manager respected her boundaries. The staff supported her quietly, proud without being loud. The confident man continued to visit from time to time. He never interrupted her work or her practice. When he listened, he did so quietly, sitting among the guests, not standing apart. His presence no longer felt intimidating. It felt human. One evening, the restaurant hosted a special gathering. The room was full yet calm. Soft light reflected off glass and silver. The piano stood ready, polished and waiting. The waitress felt a familiar nervousness, but it was different now. It no longer told her to stop, told her to care. She sat at the piano and began to play. The music was not loud or dramatic. It was honest. It carried the story of long days, quiet sacrifices, and courage found slowly. It spoke of a woman who had learned to survive, and then learned to dream again. The room listened. Conversations stopped. Even those who had heard her before felt something new in the sound. When she finished, the silence lingered, gentle and full. Applause followed, steady and warm. She stood and smiled, not out of habit, but with ease. After the guests left and the night wound down, the confident man approached her one final time. He thanked her for the music and said it had changed the way he listened. Not just to sound, but to people. She thanked him as well, not for the opportunities, but for the patience and respect. They spoke briefly about the future. There were options ahead, he said. Performances beyond the restaurant. Spaces where her music could be heard by new audiences. Nothing rushed. Nothing forced. She listened and nodded. She had learned the value of choosing her own pace. When she walked home that night, the city felt familiar again. Not distant, not overwhelming. Just present. At home, she sat by the window and thought about how far she had come. Not in success, not in recognition, but in courage. She realized something important. Her life did not need to change all at once to be meaningful. It only needed to move forward with honesty. In the weeks that followed, she continued to play, to practice, to work. Some evenings were quiet. Others were full. Each one mattered. She began teaching music to a few people during her free time. Not for money at first, but to share what she had regained. Watching others discover sound reminded her why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. The restaurant remained her grounding place. It was where her journey had turned. She never forgot that. One evening, as she finished a performance, she looked out at the room and felt peace instead of fear. She belonged there not because of applause, but because she was being herself. The confident man watched from his seat, smiling quietly. The piano no longer felt like a reminder of what she had lost. It felt like a bridge between who she had been and who she was becoming. And as the final note faded into the room, the waitress understood that her story was not about being seen by others. It was about finally seeing herself. The night continued, as nights always do. But for her, the music never ended.